Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Nicole Trahey, Chair of the Climate Change and Ecology Policy and Accountability Committee. Before we begin, there are some housekeeping points to cover. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. By taking part, you are consenting to be recorded. Please can officers introduce themselves before speaking for the first time? And if the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Officers will direct you to the assembly point in Shortlands Road. Please leave in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is in the lift lobby and down the stairs. Right, let's proceed to the agenda. We have two councillors running a little bit late. Councillor James and Councillor Afonso are on their way, so they'll join us during the meeting. But otherwise, do we have apologies for absence? No, okay. Any declarations of interest? No. The minutes from the last meeting. Do we agree the minutes? Thank you, agreed. Right, I will hand over to officers, and if you could introduce yourself before speaking, that would be great.
Hi, Laura Humphreys, Climate Alliance and Sustainability Lead.
Jim Cunningham, Climate Policy and Strategy Lead.
Annie Baker, Assistant Director for Street Environmental Services.
Bram Kant, Strategic Director of Environment.
Laura Humphreys, are you going to take lead on this? We're going to start with the circular economy strategy outline, and the introduction of food waste, recycling and wheel bins will come to you secondly. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. The presentation today will provide an overview of all of the things that we are currently doing in Hammersmith and Fulham to deliver a circular economy. We'll also present an outline of a circular economy strategy for Hammersmith and Fulham. This will help us to develop a baseline for us to understand where we currently are, where we need to be, and how we can get there. And hopefully this will lead us towards developing an ambitious plan to scale up our existing initiatives, but also to present new opportunities to make Hammersmith and Fulham a leader in the circular economy. The content presented today will only present opportunities, not actions that have been agreed. And so these are opportunities for us to scale up what we're currently doing. Next slide, please. So what does a circular economy look like for Hammersmith and Fulham? Next slide, please. Here are some examples on here what a circular economy within a borough could look like. So we would expect to look at car sharing, so we can reduce the number of vehicles that we have, leasing instead of ownership, looking at low carbon transport, for example, such as cycling. We also want to encourage recycling of all materials, so food, vapes, textiles and laptops, for example, as well as our household waste. Local agriculture is also key for us to shop locally, buy locally produced food, eat plant-based meals, and obviously compost where possible, and repair as well. So repairing our bicycles, our electronics, our clothing, replacing and repairing as many items and goods as we possibly can. Next slide, please. We're already delivering some of these initiatives in Hammersmith and Fulham. From left to right, we have our monthly clothing swaps at Live at Hammersmith, where residents can drop off clothing and pick up new second-hand items of clothing. We also have our Library of Things. It's a place for residents to borrow high-quality items at low cost and then return them. And we also have our Dr. Bike service, which moves around the borough offering repair for bicycles. Next slide, please. So what is circular economy? A circular economy allows us to have lower carbon emissions because we use the things that we have as much as we possibly can, and it minimises the need for us to produce new materials. A significant challenge is embodied carbon, which refers to emissions before and after the product or the material is produced and is put in use. But there are also co-benefits of a circular economy. So we're not only protecting the planet by embracing a circular economy, by producing less waste and mining and producing fewer materials, but we're also helping to create new, cleaner and greener skills for people to learn new opportunities. We want to deliver a circular economy through the 6 Rs. This is the approach that helps us to embrace the circular economy through everything we do. We want to reduce where possible, so asking ourselves, do we really need this? But if we do, let's reuse as much as possible what we already have, redistribute materials and goods by sharing them across the community with our friends and family, repairing, again, what we already have, trying to make what we have go further, refurbishing, and then finally recycling. Next slide, please. So why do we need to embrace the circular economy? Well, the circular economy produces carbon emissions, and these occur in the production of the materials and the things that we procure. Next slide, please. For us as an organisation, we have direct carbon emissions from our procurement, which is necessary for us to deliver our services that we offer as a local authority. Our construction work and our health and wellbeing services, as well as the equipment and supplies that we use for our services, have the highest carbon footprint. And so these are areas that we need to focus on as a local authority to bring down our carbon emissions. We can reduce the embodied emissions in these areas by using fewer resources and reusing the resources we already have as much as possible. But these are obviously high-level estimates, and we are working with our contractors to achieve more accurate estimations in these areas. Next slide, please. We also have consumption-based emissions, so this would be the average resident. Things we buy and use make up around 1/3 of our consumption-based emissions, so transport and housing are particularly high, but the things we use also contribute to our carbon footprint. Some major sources are diets, the food that we eat, flying, and our purchases of vehicles, furniture, clothing, and electricals. This obviously varies between individuals, but depending on their lifestyle choices. But these are all areas that we can embrace the circular economy to reduce our carbon footprint. Next slide, please. So the circular economy is a key part of our climate and ecology strategy. It's the 3rd pillar, and it aims to eliminate carbon emissions from the organisation and the borough. The circular economy is to embed the 6 Rs across the borough and the organisation, looking at sharing, reuse and repair. We also want to improve our recycling services and introduce new recycling services such as food waste and vapes, so that we can recycle as many materials as possible. But it's not only a mechanism to reduce our carbon emissions and our material consumption, but it also improves well-being by creating new, clean and greener jobs, for example, and helping people save money by extending the life of things that they already own. Next slide, please. So how are we already embedding circularity in the borough and as an organisation? First is that we develop tools to help support our suppliers and council staff to embed and embrace circular economy principles. One tool is the Sustainable Procurement Charter toolkit. It's a document for suppliers to commit to when they are delivering projects. It sets expectations for suppliers to support the council in its objectives to achieve our net zero goals through our climate and ecology strategy. It also helps local authorities by guiding council officers who undertake procurement tasks to include climate specific considerations in tender questions and in KPIs as well. Next slide, please. We also have our climate implementations toolkit for our decision making. All of our council decisions over a certain value are required to include climate and ecological implications in their decision making. This self-assessment tool helps council officers to assess and improve the projects to align them with our net zero goals, and helps us to understand and identify opportunities where we can embrace circularity as well. Next slide, please. And so what we're doing as an organisation, here are just a few examples of how we're already embracing the circularity as a local authority. A great example here is the Sands End Arts and Community Centre, which embraced a circular construction approach. The community centre was constructed in a circular design, incorporating a timber frame, recycled bricks, and around 35% of this new building was made from recycled products. And another example is our work in highways. So we're using recycled aggregates. So we're pushing the boundaries of the materials that we use by incorporating recycled material in our highways, but also using alternative materials that have a lower carbon footprint. And finally, for the goods that we use, our laptops as officers, we use the laptops we have for as long as possible, repairing on site using spare parts from existing laptops. But when these laptops are at the end of life for us, but not at their ultimate end of life, we can donate these through our partnership with the Good Things Foundation to help local communities, such as refugee centres and homeless shelters as well. Next slide, please. But we're also embracing the circular economy for the borough, where we have less control, and we want to support residents and organisations to be more circular, as well as our own organisation. One example, again, is a tool that we have, which is the Climate Supplementary Planning document. This is designed to provide guidance on good practice for householders and larger developers when building or retrofitting their homes, and also aims to promote reuse as well as recycling on materials that are used for construction. Another example is the circular economy around consumer goods. So we have our Library of Things that we've mentioned previously. Our Library of Things is one of the best performing libraries of things in London and beyond. But we also offer textiles and electricals monthly repair events for residents to attend and learn new skills, meet different people in the community, and make what they have go further for longer. We also have textiles repair workshops as well at the Live Out Centre. And then finally, for our food and diets, we're rolling out a borough-wide food service that Annie will talk in much more detail about later. And we're also developing and working on a food waste procurement commitment to support our schools and some of our catering organisations to lower their food waste and also embrace low carbon and plant-based meals. Next slide, please. Another initiative that we are part of that embraces the circular economy is the One World Living programme. The One World Living programme is one of 7 climate programmes that are running across London, led by the Mayor, London councils and other London-wide initiatives. We are part of the One World Living programme, which aims to reduce consumption-based emissions by 2/3 by 2030. There is one leading council for the programme, but Hammersmith and Fulham is the theme lead for electricals. So it's our responsibility to design and implement an action plan to encourage all local authorities, residents and organisations across London to make their electricals go further. And so we are very closely working with colleagues in the local authority here at Hammersmith Fulham, but also across London as well, to reduce the consumption-based emissions from electricals. But we are also already embracing the other 4 key materials of the One World Living programme. So for food, we're working with our schools and catering companies to see how we can embrace opportunities to reduce food waste and increase our plant-based meals. For plastics, we want to inspire the next generation to care for the planet and for people. An example of this is the Mudlarks project, which is delivered by Urbanwise, a local organisation, which delivers projects to help families and children learn more about plastic waste and how we can reduce plastic waste in our rivers. And we also offer, as we've touched on, monthly repair events for textiles and electricals. And so we're already delivering the One World Living programme locally here in Hammersmith Fulham. Next slide, please. So we're already doing lots of great things in Hammersmith and Fulham, but of course we can do more. And so what we want to do is to deliver and develop a circular economy strategy. Will be an ambitious plan which will be backed by a robust evidence base. So it will allow us to scale up our actions, but also present new opportunities by us creating a baseline and understanding where we currently are by collecting data and then setting actions that are measurable so that we can work towards being a leader in the circular economy. And we hope that this will become a blueprint for other councils to embrace the circular economy so that we can standardise the action that we're taking and scale up across London. Next slide, please. Embedding the circular economy principles will help us to meet not only our climate and ecology strategy, but also support the cost of living crisis by providing residents with opportunities to repair instead of buying new, and hopefully teaching them new skills as well. We want to track our progress so that we know how we are doing, how we're performing against our actions, and the cost and carbon savings associated with those, but also to try and embrace reducing and reusing as much as possible of what we already have so that we can make what we have go further. Next slide, please. We will deliver this through a circular economy framework for the organisations. There are two approaches to a circular economy strategy. One is embracing the circular economy as an organisation and embedding these principles through policy and practice. This is what we'll touch on this slide. So we have contained this subject as the circular economy can be endless, but we'll be focusing on key priority areas by hitting areas for embodied carbon, such as the built environment, mobility, food and consumer goods. It's a worldwide standard, and so our role is to educate where possible on what the circular economy is and how people can benefit from embracing the circular economy. And we want to learn from other circular economy strategies as well, working closely with council officers to tailor the circular economy solutions to our own borough's needs, not by copying what's already out there, but tailoring it to us so that we have more localised, granular solutions. And the clear framework will make us hopefully a leading authority in the circular economy. We'll do this by collecting a robust database, understanding where we currently are, what we're disposing of, and then working towards developing actions so that we can set clear goals for us to use less and use more of what we already have. Next slide, please. And that's for us as an organisation, but of course we intend to co-produce our strategy. We want to loop in all key stakeholders and ensure that we're doing things with residents and not to them. And so where we have less direct control in the borough, we still want to embrace the circular economy, but we'll do this through influencing, engaging and educating. First of all, we'll use existing data that we already have at London or UK levels to understand what more we can do to help and tailor our solutions. But we also want to carry out engagement exercises with residents so we can get more information from them, understanding what their behaviours, their consumption behaviours are and how we can embrace actions to suit their needs. But we also want to work collaboratively. So we have a number of funded projects that we hope we can deliver through external organisations, but we also want to work collaboratively and co-produce some of our strategies and plans with our key stakeholders. We have universities, hospitals and many organisations in the borough that can embrace the circular economy. We can deliver projects and solutions together, not just as a local authority. Next slide, please. So we want to plan and deliver a circular economy with people and do this through a robust evidence base. Next slide, please. We have considered literature from international level all the way down to London and various academic research to make sure we are making the most of the literature and information that's already out there so that we have an ambitious circular economy strategy. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, we've also considered other circular economy strategies so that we can take learnings from what's already out there and go above and beyond for our own. So we've reviewed existing circular economy strategies, including those on the screen, as well as others in London and outside of London. In summary, these three cities are examples of good practice as they set out action plans that are based on evidence of local collected data, not on data that's from estimations from London or city levels, but from data that's collected from residents within those cities. They also approach the circular strategies from an internal and external perspective, not just looking at the organisation and what we can do to be more circular, but how the borough and the city and the residents and organisations within it can also embrace the circular economy. And they also consider people and social equality as well as the impact circular economy has on the environment. Next slide, please. And so we want to scale up what we're already doing so that we can be an ambitious local authority and embrace circular economy. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of how we can embed the 6 R's, the circular economy principles, across the council and the borough. Here we have some examples of things that we can explore. For example, looking at low carbon material use for our buildings, or potentially using less material where possible. Of course, we want to share vehicles where possible, potentially reduce paper from some of our services, and reduce single-use plastics where possible as well. And for the borough, we would love to explore having circular economy hubs, more repair events, and potentially material swaps borough-wide. Of course, supporting businesses to embrace circular business models so that they can make what they have go further and reduce their material consumption. Ensure that schools have food waste collections, work with projects, work with businesses and key stakeholders to deliver projects in partnership, and identify new opportunities in the borough. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of where we can scale up what we're already doing. So we have our regular repair events, but we would love to have a permanent space where we can have more repair, more reuse, offer residents opportunities to upskill, hopefully have training and events on at this permanent space as well. Another example is the recent partnership with a company to rehome 700 solar panels from the Edward Woods estate. But we want to understand if there are other materials, products and goods that we can reuse and move up the waste hierarchy. And finally, share our learnings with businesses and organisations and residents via our H&F Climate Alliance. So we want to work with organisations and residents to understand how we can work in partnership and deliver what we're already doing through others. Next slide, please. As we've already touched on, One World Living programme has 4 key material themes, and the programme itself is incredibly ambitious. So by us being part of the One World Living programme, we can benefit from working with our peers across London and embracing each action plan across these materials and bringing them into Hammersmith and Fulham locally, which will help us to go above and beyond what we're already doing. And then finally, next slide, please. We can scale up the great work that we're already doing as part of our procurement. So for example, in the built environment for our highways, we're already using a higher content of recycled material than traditional materials, and we're working really closely with our suppliers to develop new highways materials that can be used that not only lower our embodied carbon, but also identify opportunities for us to use less material. And all of our highways projects also look at opportunities for us to depave by greening the grey and incorporate sustainable drainage. And another example is around our laptops, the digital services that we offer. And we're working with our new contractor to ensure that broken laptops are repaired before they're replaced. And obviously at the end of life, laptops for us, we want to make sure that they are donated to social causes, such as charities by our charity partner, so that we can extend the life of the items that we already own. Next slide, please. And so by measuring the success of the circular economy, we will work towards not only lowering our carbon emissions and benefiting the planet, but also benefiting our people by providing them with opportunities to upskill and to have, or to make what they have go longer. So next slide, please. So how do we know we have succeeded in embracing and embedding the circular economy? Well, as you can see here from the first picture, we'll see all of these things as part of Hammersmith and Fulham. We'll have multiple repair events for multiple materials across the borough. We'll have recycling, and we'll be able to reuse and share wherever possible. We'll be sharing vehicles, repairing our bicycles, and we'll be eating locally produced and sourced food. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So I'd like to hand over to Annie Baker now to talk about the introduction of food waste recycling and wheel bins.
Thank you very much for that. Do you want to hang on a second? Does anyone want to ask any questions before we go on to food and recycling? Or should we have the second report and then ask questions?
It's quite fresh now. It maybe
It's quite fresh. Do you mind if we look at questions now, and then we can move on to Annie. Does anyone like to start?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Thank
that. I'll hand over.
Thank you. I'm Stella Antoniades, Councillor Stella Antoniades. Nice to see you all. Thank you very much. It's really encouraging. I suppose, like, how do we properly get this message across to residents? I think we all need to think about the best ways and what's the plan at the moment. And sorry if you've already
Not at all. No.
mentioned it. Yeah.
No, I think, of course, continue to communicate what we're already offering, making sure that we offer more of what we do. So we have our monthly repair events for electricals and textiles. We would love to continue to promote those, but also make sure that when we are planning, for example, we are designing workshops or surveys, that we co-produce these with residents. So we're not just delivering services such as the repair events, but we're asking residents what it is that they want from us, so that when we design our solutions and our actions and our events, they are designed for residents, not just because we believe that's the best thing for us to do.
Thanks. And then on the kind of construction and materials front, like, I know that we embody a lot of carbon emissions with our buildings, and it's great that we are going to push for recycling and reuse materials. I mean, I think that needs to be legislated from right at the top, really. But I wonder if, again, we can put conditions forward in planning, or, as a minimum base, what we require.
Yeah, sure.
For new build and.
Yeah, I can come in on that. So I'm
Yes.
Jim Cunningham, Climate Policy and Strategy Lead. At the moment, under the London Plan, which we're part of, it's only operational emissions, so the ones that come from the energy use of buildings that are actually sort of regulated.
Yes.
And that developers have to sort of meet net zero by kind of achieving a certain amount of emissions reduction on site, and then they can pay a carbon offset to sort of remove the rest. That only applies to the energy use from buildings. So I think that the sort of long-term intention will be to move towards looking at embodied carbon as well, as you say, from the materials of buildings. So from 2021, the most recent sort of London plan has come in. Now large schemes, so ones that are referable to the mayor, have to submit a whole life carbon assessment as well. So that is looking at the materials. And the idea of that, I think, is to build an evidence base so that in the next iteration of the London plan, they can actually kind of start to put requirements on this as well, because there's sort of less data and understanding of the sort of materials side of emissions in the built environment at the moment than there is than the energy side. So one area where we are kind of trying to push the envelope a bit, I think, as an organisation, is all of our new build projects have a whole life carbon assessment attached to them. So we're building that evidence base about the materials and the emissions in our buildings.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because there's one, I know it's a bit more going into the micro, but like new build, for instance, and we have problems with mold, damp and mold in our social housing. And I think we need to start looking at how we actually even build our walls in buildings. If we went with cork and dry materials, so that we almost eliminate that as an environmental issue internally in our buildings too, with breathing in toxins from damp and mold. So,
completely agree. And I think the opportunity from some of those kind of lower carbon materials like cork that are also kind of reduce things like sort of emissions of organic compounds within the building.
No need to paint. Those toxins are out.
Huge kind of opportunities there. And so I think Laura talked about the Sands End Arts and Community Centre. So that's a really nice example of building using some of those kind of materials. So, you know, a timber frame instead of steel, and actually also kind of reducing the material use in the building overall as well by kind of essentially using bricks economically, actually turning them on their ends so that they reduce the amount of space that they actually have to use. So yeah, there are sort of good examples of that. It's not really regulated for at the moment. You know, kind of under the London plan, but
Do you think that's something that will be pushed?
I think we will see that come in with kind of future updates to the London plan, I imagine, and I think that is what, you know, the kind of measurement of whole life carbon at the moment is building towards.
Thank you very much. I could go on more, but I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in because.
Councillor James.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very good presentation, very informative. I just want to pick up on that engagement point because I can see you told us about community engagement and you answered my colleagues' questions about that. But from a resident's point of view, is there any work whereby we might sort of see what is a day in a good environmental life looks like, as it were, how we can really, because you've got lots of things there that are about being very holistic and looking at every aspect of the way we live. But have you looked at it from the lens of the sort of average resident sort of day or week and all the different ways in which they could live an environmentally positive life?
I think aligning to the key pillars of our strategy, of course, to considering transport, how we move around and how we heat our homes and the energy that we use. For the circular economy, it would be ultimately reducing our consumption of things. And so the best example of leading a more sustainable life and reducing our consumption is considering whether you need something. So when you want to buy something new, for example, do you really need it? And if you do need it, could you repair what you already have or potentially reuse something or borrow from a friend or family? So I think when it comes to the circular economy, there's the waste hierarchy, and we always want to aim to refuse or reduce our consumption wherever possible. And then we move down through repair, reuse, redistribution, sharing, and finally to recycling. So I think to answer your question, you know, a great example of a good, sustainable resident that embraces the circular economy is refusing to consume where possible and making the most of what they already have and making it go longer and go further.
I think probably just to add to that as well, there are kind of ways to make this part of a thriving local economy as well. So this also speaks to that question about, you know, how can we engage more people? I think what's going on in the Live At Centre at the moment, as supported by the council, is a really great example. So you've got your library of things in there, which you know, it's a business, it's making money, but it's saving residents money by allowing them to borrow rather than buy new items that, you know, realistically you're going to use once or twice a year and otherwise leave on a shelf. So it's, you know, sort of savings on carbon, savings for residents as well, whilst still being a business. And it's because it's kind of in a high footfall area, it's very visible, and it's the most thriving library of things in London at the moment. So that's then kind of tying into our sort of monthly electrical repair events as well, which are held just outside where the library of things is. So you've kind of got this tie-in, and it's high footfall, very visible to residents. Yeah, so I think you can kind of see how it can, you've got community events and sort of thriving businesses tying in together.
Councillor Afonso.
Good evening, Councillor Joseph Afonso here on behalf of the opposition. First and foremost, thank you for an excellent presentation. I very much look forward to when the strategy becomes tangible policy and returns to scrutiny, no doubt. I have a quick question on built environment, particularly, so a resident in Ravenscourt Park is running this wonderful borough-wide campaign on parks at the moment. So is there any plan to use porous tarmac or any sort of asphalt as a suitable material in our parks as part of the strategy?
Councillor Afonso, sorry, I can answer, well, I was going to bring that to the next PAC, SUDS and drainage and water, surface water. because the circular economy is tonight's particular speciality. And I'm not sure Laura or Annie could answer that. I mean, happy if Jim or Bram want to come in on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. The short answer is yes, we're already looking at that across highways, parks, etc. But we're looking to see how it performs and then make a decision on whether we go wider or not. But it's something we're actively looking at the present moment. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. I'd like to bring up a couple of things you've answered one of my questions. It was about hubs. I saw that in the Re-London webinar last week that I think Jim was on, the Acton are opening a recycle centre as a hub, and that will be where people drop off their electricals that don't work, or even that do work, that they're happy to give away for free and happy to have redone. Now, you mentioned hubs. Are we starting to look at physical places that we could centralise this or decentralise it from London and make it Hammersmith and Fulham, where residents can drop their electricals and just give them away, as it were, or have them repaired? Hubs, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, we refer to the Live at Hammersmith as our circular economy hub. We've got the Library of Things there. We've got monthly repair events for electricals and textiles. We hope to have, we drop off points as well at these events for people to embrace that. And we obviously would love to explore having a physical circular economy hub in the borough as well. It's something that we're exploring externally with organisations. We work very closely with London to understand how this could happen, but for now we have our circular economy hub within the Live At, and we work really closely with the Live At Hammersmith to try and provide as many opportunities for circularity in one place as possible, so that we can direct everybody to one place to embrace that. But yeah, in the future we would love to have a permanent space where we can have 5 days a week circular economy activity.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think the repair events are fantastic because, as far as I understand it, they include a certain amount of education, a certain amount of learning, rather than just a fixer who can fix your toaster and send you away. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can book a 45-minute session to have to attempt to have your item repaired, but they do also have training slots as well, so you not only can get your item repaired, but you can also learn skills in electrical repair as well, and all of the repair is carried out in front of the resident. They're free to ask questions to the repairer, so they're not only getting the item repaired, but they are learning new skills and they're understanding the process as well. So it's a really engaging, informative event. Fantastic.
And as far, sorry to keep coming back on this, but as far as I can tell as well, without stating the obvious, it doesn't seem to conflict with small businesses in the area, because we don't seem to have small businesses that offer repairs anymore. I mean, you barely see them. So you're not coming up any conflict with small businesses?
I mean, the repair events are once a month, so that also helps, but also higher value items, more often than not, people will choose to have those repaired by a business. They have the expertise and they're able to handle these items much more carefully. The repair events provide an opportunity for repair at lower cost, and they also provide an opportunity for residents to learn new skills. So they don't clash with local businesses. They provide two different solutions.
Fantastic, thank you.
So I'd just add to that as well. So we've also got something in West London called the Repair Directory. Actually, it covers all of London now, but we've helped to fund it in West London. So that helps to promote electrical repair businesses. So there's an online directory. If you search for Repair Directory, you'll find it. So residents can find anywhere, they can search for a particular type of item, be it a phone or a toaster or whatever it might be, and find businesses who will repair that as well. So also trying to promote small businesses working in this area.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's worth knowing. And going on to engagement, there was a study out this week that showed that actually London is doing brilliantly in terms of transport because so many Londoners use public transport. But what it did really highlight was that the the huge differential was in income. So basically the highest 10% income earners of the UK emit the most carbon. So we really are looking at high income Londoners not consuming as much as they're consuming. So we're going back to engagement here. I know it's a bit of a long-winded question, but I think the repair shops, as you say, aim for the cost of living crisis, people learning and being involved in a really good community effort. I'm absolutely loving it. How do we start to speak to the big consumers in London? And Hammersmith and Fulham, we've got this huge diverse income disparity between the best earners and the poorest. How do we go for the big consumers? Big question.
It is a big question. Yeah, it's not an area that we have a huge amount of influence over as a council, I think. So, we are better equipped to sort of enable those who would take advantage of something like a repair event that we are to influence, those bigger consumers. Unfortunately, that's probably the reality of it. I think, one of the things that we kind of try to do through our engagement is kind of show the kind of changing norms around this. So the fact that this is something that your neighbours are thinking about, that your friends are thinking about. So kind of highlighting and sort of promoting our kind of residents who are taking the opportunity to refill rather than sort of buying in plastic or repairing their goods or whatever it might be. And kind of showing that that's what your neighbour next door is doing as well. And that's the same with the kind of repair events that we're having deliver at things like sort of textiles repair events and electrical repair events. They're visible in a place where all consumers are kind of passing by. So you can see that norm is emerging. Is it a sort of silver bullet? Probably not, but I think these things change gradually.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add our contribution and our role as part of the One World Living programme helps us as well. So we're obviously having conversation at a London-wide level, not just locally. So we can take some feedback from our engagement with local residents, and we can feed that up to local levels, and organisations such as London councils will collate all of our feedback and hopefully use some of those responses for consultations and other sort of national and London-wide responses. And so we're able to contribute at a much higher level through our involvement in the One World Living programme as well.
Fantastic. Are there any more questions? I forgot to thank Councillor Harcourt for attending as well. Cabinet lead.
No problem whatsoever. This is an incredibly important topic. I'm not so sure that the term circular economy gets it across to members of the public what we're trying to do, but those 6 R's I think do actually make it quite clear in terms of materials, building materials, and so on. There's a lot to be done with the planning department. We've got, you saw the the supplementary guidance there, but that is what it is. It's guidance. It's not actually rules. And so until we can redo or the actual development plan, which takes ages, because only too well, it has to go through God knows how many stages of public consultation. It'd take about 3 years before a new plan can be adopted. So there's a timescale involved in that, but there's all sorts of new other materials that can be used, quite apart from the timber idea that we've used down in the Sands End. There's various types of low carbon concrete, other types of concrete that are used in terms of slower setting rather than the types that they use at the moment, so you can load them fairly quickly. If you're prepared to take longer, then it's lower carbon emissions. And I think while work is being talked about on embodied carbon, it's not really there as part of a requirement as yet. So I think that's something that needs to be done as well. But no, very good presentation, and can't wait to go to the electrical repair place.
Absolutely excellent. And I've just remembered as well, I just read today that IKEA are now doing a pre-loved IKEA furniture swap. So you can take your old IKEA furniture back to IKEA and they will upcycle it and sell it off for you. So any other questions? Shall we move on to the second part of the presentation. Thanks, Annie.
Lovely, thank you. So yes, I'm here to talk about the plans we have for increasing food waste recycling in the borough, and we're also introducing wheel bins to properties where they're suitable. So I'm talking about the work we're doing there. To start off, if I could have the next slide, just wanted to give a little bit of context around waste management. We've got a relatively low recycling rate of around about 25%. And that's, London and other inner city kind of areas, we do tend to have lower recycling rates because it's difficult to recycle the quantities that you can recycle if you're a more rural area and you've got lots of garden waste to recycle and fewer high density housing places to service. But we do have really low waste arisings, some of the lowest waste arisings in the country. So in terms of the amount of waste we're producing, that's really good news. We produce less than a lot of other places. I've put here the waste hierarchy, this inverted triangle. So we, as a principle in waste management, are always trying to move waste up this hierarchy. At the bottom, there is disposal followed by recovery, and that is really waste that is being thrown away. Disposal would have been traditionally things like landfill. Recovery is going to what's called an energy from waste facility, where the waste is burnt, but energy is being recovered from that waste. And that is what we do with the vast majority of the waste that is disposed of in Hammersmith and Fulham. So we've moved everything up a level, which is good, but we obviously want to move things up further. I'd say that everything that isn't green in that triangle is what we sort of think of as rubbish and waste, whether we're recycling it or not. Reuse and prevention, if we fix an item of clothing or we get a radio repaired or whatever, we've never really thought of that as being waste at all. We've sort of prevented it from falling into the kind of waste category. But for the purposes of the hierarchy, we're thinking about all of the things really that we might throw away, including the things that we might have purchased or that we might have bought in a disposable format, and instead we did something else, to be right at the top of that hierarchy. And the reason I mention that is that a big focus of what we're trying to do is to pull more waste up into the recycling category, but really what we want is less waste, and in fact no waste at all would be ideal, and everything being in these green categories here. So we do have quite a bit of waste. The economy is currently predominantly linear, so there is quite a bit of waste for us to manage in Hammersmith and Fulham. For our street-based properties, residents have their recycling collected in clear sacks and their refuse collected in black bags, and many of our estates and other flatted type dwellings have got communal bins and larger containers for waste and for recycling. Back in autumn of 2020, we introduced a prototype service to test out a way of providing more recycling services, particularly food waste. So that service has been running for 3 years and we're currently expanding that. As I say, the aim being to move as much waste as we can up the waste hierarchy. It is always better to do something different with waste other than produce it and then recycle it. So in the case of food waste, if people can home compost or shop a little differently to avoid having things that are thrown away, then that is clearly better. And we have a home composting scheme and we continue to promote that through all of this, because that's a brilliant thing to do, but you need to have a use for the compost that you produce. So if you haven't got a garden, for instance, you maybe don't want to home compost, because what would you do? Even if you've got the space on a balcony, you can't do very much with the compost. So a little bit about the services that we began 3 years ago. On this next slide, if I may, there's a copy of the leaflet that we sent out at the time to let people know about the changes that were happening. We covered about 6,000 properties in different parts of the borough, a sort of a week's work for the vehicles that were involved. Of those 6,000 properties, about 5,000 had space for wheel bins and about 1,000 were just had space for the food waste. We gave people a larger wheel bin, which is a 240 sort of standard size wheel bin for their recycling, a smaller wheel bin, 140 litres for their refuse, and a smaller 23 litre caddy for food waste, with an indoor caddy that's 7 litres inside, and some compostable liners to get people started with the food waste. We worked really closely with residents to make sure that people had the containers that were suitable for them. So we only delivered containers where we could see there was suitable, accessible space, safe for the crews to collect, reasonable for residents to store the bins. And we provided different sizes, and we had lots of different approaches where there were, for example, houses that were split into flats. People didn't necessarily want their own bin, they preferred to share. In other places, people really did want their own bin, but smaller bins. And so we adapted to make this fit people's requirements. If I could have the next slide, please. We saw the recycling rate in those areas go up to about 40%, which is fantastic. We monitored the overall quantities of waste, which remained about the same. And that is important for us to do that, because if we'd have had lots of people who were home composting and suddenly stopped, for instance, would have been moving things the wrong way in the waste hierarchy. We had very low levels of complaints. Around 3% of people complained during the rollout. We know as a result of the containers that we need to use many fewer clear bags. There are still properties where there is no space for bins, and clear bags are an essential part of the service where that's the case. But the wheel bins mean that clear bags aren't then needed, and that's many thousands of clear bags that we're saving by avoiding that single-use plastic. And we carried out a survey this time last year of people who've been using that service. And I've got the results summarised on the next slide. I don't know how easy this is to read in the size that it is, but 90% of people either strongly agreed or agreed that they were happy with the service. 95% of people strongly agreed or agreed that the service was easy to use. More than half of people said that they agreed or strongly agreed their streets were cleaner. 64% of people agreed or strongly agreed that they recycle more. People had enough space in their bins every week. And we asked people whether these things were important to them as well. And again, we had very strong feedback that people did care about having cleaner streets, being able to recycle more. Another benefit of the containers is that they mean that the crews are having to do fewer sort of twisting and lifting motions that they do with the sacks. So there's a manual handling benefit in terms of health and safety for the crews and less risk of sharps injuries. So a range of benefits which we know have mattered to people. We asked people as well about things like, their approach to sharing bins, and found that some people did want to do that and other people might consider doing it in future. Just under 2/3 of people in the prototype areas were interested in the garden waste scheme. Obviously, there is a lot of suitability for wheel bins in these areas, so they may be more likely to have gardens, for instance, but that was really interesting. And very few respondents, only 2% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that the service was easy to use. And that was typically around issues with just getting the bins put back exactly where they had been collected from, or issues around reliability of the service, which obviously we want to make as minimal as possible, but not issues with the design of the service itself. If I could have the next slide. We are now looking to expand this scheme, having spent the time looking at the success of the prototype. So from the 6th of November, we have been delivering containers and food waste caddies to parts of the borough, and we're going to do that at a pace that allows us to engage with residents as we go, so that we can continue to have the approach that we had in the prototype area of really responding to individual needs. And I've got to say that when you walk every street in Hammersmith and Fulham, and really in London as a whole, every street is different, and also pretty much every front garden is slightly different where there is space at the front. So we know that where there might be space at one house, next door might have a cycle store, and actually it's not therefore suitable for the wheel bins, and we'll make sure that the service works for people. We are delivering the containers that we know have worked for the majority, and then we will work with people to change that. Although when we're on site, we have a range of sizes with us, so if we can see there isn't space for something, we'll deliver something a little bit smaller, or put in sharing if we're talking with residents and they're keen to share bins. We've got an assisted collection service, and that service has run for years, but that will continue. And it may be that different residents or more residents find it difficult to move the bins, for example, where the sacks may not have been an issue. So we're making sure that we promote that as we roll the service out for anybody who has any accessibility concerns. We've got a lot of focus on making sure that we do this engagement. So we've got dedicated resources in place for our deliveries, engagement on street as we're doing the deliveries, and also resources in the back office to pick up any queries. We have so far delivered, since we started at the beginning of the month, we've delivered over 2,000 sets of wheel bins, over 500 food waste only containers where there isn't the space for the wheel bins. As of the end of last week, I think we had around 48 people had contacted us to do a swap of the bins, so that's very encouraging and indicates that we're getting the assessment right in terms of what the suitable containers are, or that it's not suitable for wheel bins as we go. And we've also got a service to remove people's old bins, so we can take those away and recycle them if people don't have a use for them. And I think that's really important, because often there's not a lot of space to have old bins next to new bins. And it's great if people have got an idea about something else they'd like to do with that bin and reuse it, but we do want to make sure that the recycling option is there and easy to use. We're looking ahead as well to all of our homes that have communal bin stores, so particularly estates and blocks of flats, so that in 2024 we'll be looking at the best ways of introducing communal food waste collections. Obviously the needs there are a little bit different in terms of how do you easily transport food waste from your kitchen to a communal bin, making sure we get the collection arrangements right. Often bin stores can have quite limited space, so making sure that the ratio of other refuse and recycling is right as well. We've already started talking to housing colleagues about that and the best way to do that, and I think it's very likely we take a similar approach of making this a case-by-case service that meets the needs of individual blocks and estates. So yes, that will be what follows, but this will take around 6 months as we go through, and so far we've had lots of positive feedback as we're out and about. Not everybody is delighted to see the containers coming, and we're working with people explaining the reasons that we're doing it. Where people aren't very happy initially, we just at this stage are asking people to please try the bins and see what they think, because we know in the prototype area, in a lot of cases, the bins worked out really well, and where it doesn't, we want to make sure that we've got different options that we can offer.
Thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. Do we have any questions for Councillor James?
Thank you very much. Very exciting to hear about not only how well you've done so far, but all these plans to expand it. I want to just pick up on the last point you raised about people who are less than happy about the idea of it. If residents don't want to have a bin, can they opt out, or what's the position?
We really want to take that on a case-by-case basis and work out what the issues are, and are there ways we can overcome those. We've recently found an even smaller design of bin that we think usually bins have to be a certain height to fit on the vehicle hoists. And one of the benefits of wheel bins from a collection perspective is that the vehicle does the lifting. So the hoist will lift the bin up and tip it out into the back of the vehicle. And for that reason, the bins have to be a certain height. But we have found a bin that is quite a bit shorter, about 17 centimetres shorter, a little bit smaller in volume as well. So won't be suitable everywhere, but might help in some of the places where, for instance, somebody has a bin store, it allows a container of a certain height, this type of bin might come in. So we're getting a small order of those so we can check that we're confident that they can work and contain enough waste to be useful still. And we'll be asking residents to try those where we've got particular circumstances where we think, like the bin stores, for instance, where they would work well. So we really want people to try and talk to us about what the issues are. And actually, in that way, we will also learn more ourselves about whether there are particular challenges that we need to find different solutions for. So that's our first port of call is let's see if we can solve the problems. And we know that has worked really well in the places where we've tested it. So
it's an iterative process.
Yeah.
I just also wanted to go back to the data at the beginning where you said that the percentage of recycling was at 25% borough-wide. I just wondered whether that was A, typical across London boroughs, and B, whether that's actually changed over time in this borough.
It has increased incrementally here, and across London recycling rates have increased. I've used 25% as a sort of rough figure. It's a little higher than that. We are not one of the higher performing London boroughs, and some of the outer London boroughs have a lot more recycling, well above 40%, where they've got significant tonnages of garden waste. If we just looked at the dry recycling, our performance is much more on a par with across London, but we don't have the volume of garden waste doesn't exist, and at the moment we don't offer a service, so that's something we're looking at, but we won't ever have the same number of gardens as Bexley, or some of the greener outer London boroughs. But for an inner London borough, we have I think we're sort of at the top of the bottom quartile. So we're by no means the worst performing London borough, but inner London boroughs do have lower recycling rates typically.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor James. Do you have any questions? Councillor Anthony Hardis?
Thank you very much again. Jim, did you?
Casey. Oh, sorry. Sorry, we have a resident. Casey, if you want to ask a question, would you come up and use the speaker, because otherwise you won't be heard at home. Thank you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Casey, Aberoni resident. Batteries and medical blister packs, any ideas, thoughts or plans around those?
There are battery recycling points around the borough, I think in most of our libraries, and there are other locations you can take batteries to. Quite a few shops will take batteries as well. Blister packs, I will have to check, but I'm very happy. Again, that's a sort of shop take back and pharmacy take back as to whether that is happening at the moment. So I will check that and come back to you. One of the things that is important for us in terms of what we can collect from the doorstep for recycling is we need to be able to collect it in a way that means it can either subsequently be easily sorted and then sold on or passed on for recycling. So there's got to be a route where separating the material is viable, and then also there's also a market. And blister packs are really tricky because they're more than one material. They're very small, so in the machinery that sorts all of the recycling, cans and plastic bottles and paper can be sorted mechanically, but it's very difficult to sort those smaller items. But I have heard of schemes where there are locations outside of local authority control where it's possible to take them back. So I will look into that and come back to you.
Yeah, around blister packs, the only one that I've heard of and tried to follow up on is I think it's supposed to be Superdrug, but it seems sketchy as to whether or not it's still in existence. And around batteries, I'm aware that there's greater awareness coming in now about the risks that they pose. So even if we can't do anything to directly influence home collections, at least maybe an awareness campaign.
Yeah, we're working with our colleagues in comms and across. We work with three of the waste collection authorities. There are 4 waste collection authorities that form part of the Western Riverside Disposal Authority. And battery recycling is really important. Exactly as you say, we want the batteries to be recycled, but also they are a risk if they're put into the residual waste. Lithium-ion batteries in particular have been the cause of several fires at waste transfer stations elsewhere. It's really important that those things don't go into the general waste, that they are treated separately. So yes, that's absolutely something we're aware of. And I think it's quite likely that increasingly there will be campaigns that are not just individual councils doing what they can, but also wider regional and national campaigns on that as well. So many items now do have some kind of battery inside them, and so it's really important that people are aware that they should be ideally reusing or avoiding those things becoming waste. But if it's got to be disposed of, making sure that happens properly.
Thank you. I just happen to know that the TerraCycle recycling of blister packs is still in Superdrug. I was there just a couple of days ago, and it's at the back in Hammersmith. Superdrug. TerraCycle are saying that they're still picking up, but maybe we could follow up on TerraCycle and see if they are still collecting, because I know the disposal, the box that they were collecting it in was very full, so they might not be collecting them at the moment. And Councillor Harcourt.
Just briefly, sticking on the battery issue, in particular, when you mentioned the lithium-ion batteries, it's also things like the single-use vapes and such like have got them in. And as a member of the board at Western Riverside Waste Authority, there's quite often smallish fires, but they're all caused by people putting lithium-ion batteries generally in the waste. Now, whether the various battery recycle things that I've seen in local Tesco's and Sainsbury's, they're all the usual Duracell style, not the lithium-ion ones. So is there anywhere that separates or means of separating those out, or have we got it across to people? There's a difference. I mean, I wouldn't know personally wouldn't know where to take my lithium-ion batteries. And I've got 3 sitting around at home, and they're they're not the little ones. They're the ones that go in things like hedge clippers and such like.
I'll look into the third-party supplied ones. I think anywhere where their electronic items can be taken for recycling, that would include the lithium-ion batteries. But let me confirm that, and the other locations as well.
Thank you very much, Annie Baker. I think Annie's going to come back on that. We'll have a report. Can we have a report by the next PAC? Just answer those 2 questions. That would be fantastic. Councillor Antonadis.
Yeah, just a very quick one. Thank you. So thin plastic that generally couldn't be recycled with Hammersmith. Some supermarkets take it, don't they? The co-op, you can put it all in I mean, obviously you want to discourage as much of that as we can, but on these blister packs, they're on the top, aren't they? So my mum has one, we just rip that off, send the bit to co-op, and then the blister pack just goes in her recycling, actually, because it's just plastic. So that's a way, I suppose, on that. But I think maybe we can also get a message out on thin plastic, because we don't take that it can be recycled, but at the same time we want to discourage it. So we want to encourage supermarkets not to use it as much. That is a big issue, isn't it? Like your local Sainsbury's is covered in thin plastic.
Really is an issue in terms of, I mean, it's very difficult for us to handle at the moment, because all of our recycling in the clear bag goes to the materials recycling facility. The clear bags are recycled, but the clear bags are, once they're ripped open and the material comes out, those are large clear bags that are easily separated. Plastic film tends to be very small. It's very easy for it to be contaminated. If it's been on the top of a yogurt pot, for instance, it probably has, the food that it's been containing may weigh more than the film itself. And when you think about this as part of a process that needs to have value in it, if you're moving something, if the yogurt that's still on that film lid, for instance, weighs more than the film, you're spending more moving that around than you are on the film itself. So it's a difficult material to recycle. The government is talking about putting requirements in place for plastic films to be recycled. So I know that in Western Riverside, one of the things that will happen is looking at whether it's possible to make the MRF suitable to sort those materials so that we could co-collect plastic films within our recycling. But at this stage, that technology isn't there yet. Yes, there are shops you can take plastic film back to, and that's great. It's a very lightweight element of the waste. So taking all of the plastic film out of the waste would be a small part of what we're doing. But plastics are, they're an issue in terms of street cleansing as well, because they're very fine, they blow away very easily. That harder to control if you're having a picnic. Those will tend to be the bits that maybe don't end up in the bin, for instance. So yeah, lots of issues with plastic film.
And just one more thing. Okay. Bottles, refilling, all of that. Travel bottles and everything. I think I don't know where we start, but maybe we have to try and incentivize our residents somehow to refill and use more recyclable refilling, basically. How do we do that? How do we incentivize them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the case of bottled water, for example, there's already a disincentive in the sense that you have to buy the bottle of water, but the refilling is, the financial incentive exists without us doing anything, and there's still a lot of purchase of bottled water. But I know there are increasing numbers of drink fountains across London, and that it is becoming more of a sort of having your own reusable coffee cup. Lots of cafes and coffee shops will sell reusable mugs and things, so that the whole sort of idea of refill for beverage rather than
I'm talking more
containers.
Cosmetics or shampoos and those kind of things, where we could just have hubs where you could just, I know there's some shops, there's one in Turnham Green, isn't there? But it's expensive, but
I mean, I think
that's the thing, you can go and refill, and that's great.
Yes, and
cleaning products, all of that.
Yeah, and which is brilliant because
Yeah.
it cuts down on the packaging waste, but you're still consuming the thing you're purchasing, which you may need, you know, we obviously do have to consume things. So,
Yeah.
but I guess that's a whole part of the circular economy that needs to be looked at. It's a difficult conundrum because packaging includes branding in terms of what people want to buy and what will sell, I guess. You know, hard for shops to all have a refill option at this stage, but maybe, you know, if the demand is there from consumers, maybe that is where maybe that will become more of a mainstream sale.
Yeah, if I could follow up on that, just because is about the water fountains. That we don't seem to have that many water fountains. You know, I've been in lots of places now where it is absolutely standard to have water fountains everywhere. Every business has a water fountain as you walk in. You know, every restaurant is carafe of water before offering bottled water. Is there anything we can do to encourage more water fountains in our tube stations? I know these are properties maybe that we don't own, and that's the problem. But any feedback on that?
It may be something that there, again, if people are asking for that as a consumer and as a customer, then that is something that may prompt more businesses to offer that. But within the public realm, you know, that's certainly something that we're very conscious of and want to make sure that there are good facilities for people to avoid having to purchase bottled water, for instance.
Councillor Fonse.
Thank you very much for your informative presentation. I have a few questions. Do you have an idea of how much the bins and the subsequent borough-wide rollout is going to cost?
Yes, we went through a decision-making process to introduce the scheme, so that was all part of the decision-making back in the summer.
What is the figure?
I don't have a single figure right now. I can come back and provide information that we
That would
provided.
be very
about
helpful.
the
Thank you
decision-making.
very much. I've had a few residents also email in the recycling bags. Is there going to be any change to the delivery mechanism, i.e. libraries, house delivering, with regards to recycling bags?
People who stay on the bag scheme, the system will continue as it does now.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Under the new bin regime, are you guys planning to charge extra for garden waste at all?
At the moment, we're just looking at how we can introduce a garden waste scheme. So once we've done that work, we will come back with the details. So
is there likely to be an charge?
I don't. We need to look at the whole
Okay.
system and work out what's viable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. I've just got a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. Is there more or less contamination in the recycling because of the bin rather than the bag? Because, you know, are people literally putting other rubbish in bins because they're there and they can, whereas a bag is tied up and people wouldn't. I don't know if there's much street rubbish thrown around, but if you've got any figures on that.
I don't have any specific figures for us, partly because of the way we collect at the moment, and we still offer bags and bins, and the prototype is relatively small. From a waste management perspective, generally speaking, if you've got bins, it's just a little bit harder to see what's in the entirety of the bin than it is in the clear bag. So it is possible that we'll see slightly more contamination, but the contamination is sorted at the materials recycling facility. So contamination is an inefficiency of process. It's the wrong thing going to the wrong place that then has to be taken somewhere else. But overall, what we want is the recycling, and we want people to recycle the right stuff and put the stuff that can't be recycled into the bin. We will make sure that part of the just day-to-day good running of the service includes collecting data in terms of where we're finding contaminated materials, talking to people, making sure that we're letting people know what can and can't go into the containers, and that will be quite a big part of our outreach work generally with residents, is making sure that the right stuff is going into the bins. But yes, you know, you can only see we already have the same situation in all of the larger bins that we collect from already on estates and so on, and contamination is a part of all recycling systems currently. And I think as recycling behaviours are more and more embedded and become just more and more part of what we all expect to do, we'll see those numbers come down because it's more efficient to separate things at the beginning and have as little going to the wrong place as possible. But contamination is a major problem when when a vehicle load has so much that it's made the whole lot of stuff that you've collected becomes not sortable and not good value to sort. And we don't have that problem, but we do have contamination in a lot of the loads that we do deliver, and that is sorted out and goes off to be disposed of, but all of the recycling is recycled.
Really sorry. It's just occurred to me, and it might sound a bit funny, but where does all the dog poo go? What happens to it? You know, like all the bins. Well,
Dog poo,
yeah.
it will go with the rest of the litter in the litter bin. It shouldn't go into the recycling side of the dual litter bins.
No, I don't mean that in that sense, like the street in the streets, the street bins and yeah, and the like the actual dog poo bins on the street.
It's normal, it's waste, so it will go to be for energy recovery the way that all our other waste for disposal goes. It doesn't have to be, it's not
so that all goes to energy recovery.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And another question, just I know from particularly from our mayor that she would be happy for us to go on to ask a little bit more about assisted collection and how that is panning out. First of all, in the study, and as we're moving forward, rolling it out, are we supporting residents?
That's exactly what the scheme is set up to do. So we have relatively low levels of assisted collections in Hammersmith and Fulham, partly because of the layout of our properties is that we tend to have very small front gardens, so people don't have a big driveway to drag a container down or a bag down. So it's something we will keep a close eye on. It's not something we had a significant shift on in the prototype area, but the assisted collection service is there for people who need it. We will be getting in touch with people who've got assisted collections to make sure that as the new service is rolled out, that it's still working for them. They'll continue to have an assisted collection if they already have one, and if more people need to join, then we'll make sure that happens.
Fantastic. And let me see, just a couple more things. So we're going to basically throughout the borough have a split service between hopefully pretty much lots and lots of houses will have the food bin available. But then we're going to have to look at communal spaces, blocks of flats and estates. And then we're going to have some sack collections. How are we going to get it over the line that we don't have such a broken sort of bit here and bit there, that we make this cost effective for us and efficient? Have we particularly looked, as a resident brought it up to me, that in Europe they have almost sunken pits that's communal in areas where people can either put their recycle or their trash, and that goes underground, so we wouldn't have the problem of rats and rodents, you'd think, but there's options in Europe. It may be that they are just different architecturally, so different, we are so that we couldn't possibly look at putting things in the ground. But have we looked at options to sort of tie up the loose ends?
To answer the point about the sort of underground storage, that those are really familiar in lots of European cities, but there tends to be a lot more flatted dwellings in those areas where they're well used. For us, the disadvantages would be you can't just, although the space for the bin is quite small, the space for the chamber is still an underground chamber, so you can't use the land on top. You couldn't put a heavy vehicle on that land, so that there is a space requirement. So our road space and public realm is being used for other things as well that would take away from potentially. Also, a move to communal bins where we've currently got people with their own containers, it makes it much easier for us to identify in those places where it's suitable. We can see who's recycling. If somebody's contaminated their recycling, we know who we need to have a chat with, or, you know, we can see the amount of waste that's being produced, and it makes it a bit easier to manage that service. And we would lose that if we had communal containers. They have been used in parts of London. I think Tower Hamlets have some. They need a very specialised vehicle to, you know, the vehicle sort of comes and lifts this huge unit up, and they're noisy as well. And the other issue with bins on streets is that they do potentially attract other waste that's then sits next to them, which a vehicle that's doing that action won't necessarily need to take away. So there are issues around their suitability in our areas. What we can do to make the service more, you know, we've got vehicles that sacks can go into the back of, but they can also lift the bins. So although we're offering different ways of collecting the waste where it's more suitable for different residents, it will be the same crews who can collect those in the same vehicles. So we're moving the service towards using a more standard type of vehicle that can do a number of different types of activity, so that from a service perspective, that standardization exists, but from a resident experience perspective, there is the ability to offer sacks or different sizes of bins. Like I say, even some shorter bins now we think will work. So we're trying to make sure we get both of those things, both a service that is efficient and effective, but also different options for different types of property, because we've got such a wide range of housing stock. That's really important for the service to be efficient.
Thank you very much. And another one, sorry, I think this will be my final question, but tying in the repair and recycle and the way we use Wandsworth, one thing I was considering is also that we have lots of individual cars making a journey to Wandsworth dump and then going home, and then they're making it. So we've got lots of these little car journeys taking stuff to Wandsworth dump. Could we possibly have a once a month or even bi-monthly, like maybe every 2 months, have a big collection day where we say, right, why don't we have big collection on the last Sunday every other month, and people put out the table that they no longer want, and that we go and collect all the big things, so that we don't have lots of car journeys going to Wandsworth dump.
So we offer a bulky waste collection service, so you can book that and have items collected at a booked day. So that's one thing to avoid the car journeys. The other thing we're looking at is whether we can introduce a kind of it would be a sort of mobile site, and whether we could have a vehicle that could visit different areas to take, might not be the biggest items, but things like batteries and smaller things. So we're exploring what the options are around that, because that anything we can do that helps reduce the number of journeys that are necessary must be a good thing, and to make it a bit easier to recycle and potentially we would need to look at what we could easily separate and so on, but trying to think about ways of bringing the service more locally. But the bulky waste collection exists at the moment and is a really good option for disposing of large items.
Thank you. That's really good to know that we're looking at options. You know, that's really good. Thanks, Casey. Back to you.
Is there mileage and capability to sort of like look at some of these third party, whether they're platforms or solutions, things like Recycle, Olio, Tip App, and all of these things where you can encourage sharing and people?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something we've talked quite a bit today about comms and making sure people are aware of these things. There's Recycle. I mean, I have to say, just local Facebook groups are often a great place to offer things or to find things. So all of those virtual kind of platforms are great. And that's, you know, that's the thing with something that you might not, or I might not want anymore, that if I can make that available, there might well be somebody who can make use of it, and that's great. But those sorts of informal networks are really useful from that perspective.
Is it within the council's gift to then promote those things? Because I know that they're sort of like, some of them are commercial and some of them are third party, but is it within the gift to promote?
I don't imagine there's an issue with that, but I suspect that a lot of those things are already maybe places that people go to more frequently than they would visit the council website, for example. Facebook, for example, has a sort of it's a thing, this massive entity, isn't it? Yes, but it might be something we want to think about in terms of our comms, just to point out that there might be things that people are doing that they're not even thinking about from a green perspective or a waste avoidance perspective. They're just doing it because it's something that you naturally think to do, is to see if anybody wants something you no longer need.
On Nextdoor, the council do post on that, don't they? So that loads of people look at that. So that's probably, they could just put bulletins out.
Yes, and I think in the newsletters and so on, we have promoted reuse type options, but that no doubt something we could do more of.
Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think without any more questions, I think we're going to note the report. Everybody happy to note the report? I've just made a couple of things that we're going to come back on: the batteries, the medical blister packs, the cost of the overall changeover on the collection, the fact that bags are going to be available still, collection bags are still going to be available, and we're going to learn more, hopefully, about the garden waste scheme going forward. And then we might actually, could we go and have a look, see whether we promote on Nextdoor and whether we could get things like the live at events highlighted in the newsletter as high as we can, above the football. So thank you very much. Now, the very last thing is to discuss next PAC meeting will be budget, actually. So I have discussed doing floods and suds after the budget. Would you know what? Is that okay? Budget for next meeting. Can you remember the date of it? Is it February the 2nd? 6th, February the 6th. So I'd like to thank you very much for the brilliant presentations and coming along this evening. And unless anyone has anything else, we'll see you at the next PAC meeting, February the 6th, and it will be budget and floods and suds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.